Number 3. Samuel Lottery. London, Ontario is the midway point between Detroit, Michigan and Toronto, Ontario. It is a quiet city, and in the 1990s it had a population of just over 300,000 people. On January 18, 1996, Samuel Lottery, an 18-year-old high school student, failed to return home. His family alerted the police, but Lottery was nowhere to be found. A month later, Lottery was still missing. That's when an envelope was dropped off at the church where his family worshiped. Inside the envelope was a letter and a picture. His family recognized the photograph because it was one that Lottery kept in his wallet. The letter was written on unique stationery, and the complete contents of the letter have never been released. What is known is that the writer suggested that the police should look in the Thames River, which is the main river that runs through the city. The police did a search of the Thames, and they didn't find any trace of Lottery. 6 months later, the family received a second letter that was written on the same stationery. This time, the letter was mailed to their house. Again, the writer said to search the river. The police searched again, but just like last time, they found no trace of Lottery. 16 months after Lottery went missing, a man was walking his dog near the Thames River, and his dog found a human arm bone. He contacted the police and they found some more bones close by, but they did not find a complete skeleton. They sent the bones away to be tested, and 19 months later the results came back and confirmed what Lottery's mother had feared. The bones belonged to her son, meaning that he was most likely dead. They were hoping to find more of his remains in the area, but nothing else ever turned up. About 3 years after some of his bones were found, his family buried the remains that they did have, and they tried their best to move on with their lives. Then, 12 years after he went missing, Lottery's skull was found about 1.5 miles down the river from the other skeletal remains. The discovery reopened old wounds for Lottery's family, but it failed to provide any clues as to what happened to him. The police in London are fairly certain that Lottery was a victim of foul play. Their investigation has led them to believe that Lottery had been specifically targeted. They are also sure that the letter writer was involved in the murder in some way, or knows someone who was involved. The police are hoping that the killer, or killers, will come forward, or someone who recognizes the stationery will contact the police, so that Samuel Lottery's family may finally get some closure. Number 2. Jay Cook and Tanya van Cuylenborg. By November 1987, 20-year-old Jay Cook and 18-year-old Tanya van Cuylenborg had been dating for about 6 months. The couple, who both lived at home with their parents in Victoria, British Columbia, were inseparable, and on November 18th they left to go on their first overnight trip. They borrowed Cook's father's van, and they were going to drive to Seattle to camp, and then they were going to pick up some furnace parts for Cook's father. They took a ferry from Victoria to Port Angeles, Washington, and then they took another ferry from Bremerton to Seattle. The next evening, the couple hadn't returned home and the family started to worry. After a sleepless night, they contacted the police. 4 days later, Van Cuylenborg's body was found in a ditch near Alger, Washington, which is about 76 miles away from where they got off the ferry in Seattle. She was partially clothed and her hands were bound with a zip tie. She had been sexually assaulted and then she was shot to death. The next day, her wallet was found, along with more zip ties, surgical gloves, the keys to the van, and a half-empty box of ammunition, and they were found 14 miles away in Bellingham. 2 blocks away from the wallet, at the Greyhound bus station, the van was located, but there was still no sign of Jay. The police warned Cook's parents that he might be the one responsible for the murder, and he fled. His parents knew that he wasn't a killer, and they got confirmation in the most tragic way possible the day after the van was found. Cook's body was found by hunters near Monroe, about 62 miles south of where Van Cuylenborg's body was found. He had been beaten and strangled to death. The police think that the couple either met their killer, or killers, on the ferry, or they picked up a hitchhiker or hitchhikers. They also believe that Cook was killed and dumped before Van Cuylenborg was murdered. Based on where the bodies were found, the police have speculated that the killer was local to the area and knew the back roads. Finally, the police think that he was taunting them by leaving behind the surgical gloves. It was a way to tell them that they weren't going to find any fingerprints. A week after the bodies were discovered, Cook and Van Cuylenborg's parents each received a disturbing letter in the mail. The author of the letter wrote about how he hated Canadians, and the chance to kill the couple was too good to pass up. Then, once a month over the next year, both sets of parents received a letter, or for holidays like Father's Day and Mother's Day, he sent them Hallmark greeting cards. Sometimes he would sign off the cards as J or Tanya, depending on what parent he sent the card to. Besides taking credit for the murders, the writer would taunt and mock the parents for the loss of their children. He also sent letters to the Royal Canadian Mounted Police and a newspaper in British Columbia. The postmark of the first letter was from Seattle, but over the year the cards and letters were postmarked in Los Angeles, New York, and Canada. This led to speculation that the letter writer may be a transient. The police also think that he may have been educated in Canada because of certain phrases he wrote and the way he spelled certain words. In 2010, the police were able to pull some DNA from the letters, and a profile was created. It was compared to the DNA profile constructed from evidence that was found on Van Cuylenborg, and it was not a match. So there is a good chance that the letter writer is just a sadistic prankster. However, they think it's odd that he focused on the family for a year, so they think it's quite possible that he was involved in the murders in some way. The police said if the letter writer wasn't involved in the murders, he wouldn't face any charges if he turned himself in. They just want to eliminate him as a suspect if he didn't participate in the murders of the young couple. As was mentioned prior, the police do have a DNA sample that was found on Van Cuylenborg, but it has not been linked to anyone. The police do not think that this is the only violent crime that the perpetrator committed, but the DNA has not been linked to any other crimes. The police and the families of Jay Cook and Tanya Van Cuylenborg are hoping that one day the person who left the DNA at the crime scene will have their DNA entered into CODIS and finally give some closure to the case. Number 1. Cecilia Newball and Rene Perez Jr. On September 18, 1994, 31-year-old Cecilia Newball and her husband, Alfredo Newball, who lived in the Chatsworth neighborhood of Los Angeles, celebrated their first wedding anniversary. On their anniversary, friends and family threw Cecilia, who was 8.5 months pregnant, a surprise wedding shower. 2 days later, Alfredo left for work, leaving Cecilia at home with her 6-year-old son, Ray Perez Jr., who was Alfredo's stepson. Cecilia, who was on maternity leave, said that she was going to stay home and write thank you cards for the wedding shower. Alfredo started his shift at 2:30 p.m., and on his lunch break he called home, but there was no answer. When he returned home later that evening, he discovered that Cecilia and Rene weren't there. There were no messages inside the apartment indicating where they went. When Alfredo was driving home, he saw Cecilia's Jeep parked in the street instead of in their secure parking lot. So he decided to check her Jeep to see if there were any clues to her whereabouts. Inside the Jeep there was a farewell card, and the only thing written in the card was Cecilia's signature. Inside the card there was a picture of Rene. In the passenger seat there was her wedding ring and her engagement ring. A week later, Alfredo got an envelope in the mail that was postmarked in Van Nuys, California. It contained a second identical farewell card. This time with the card there was a letter that was typewritten. The writer claimed to be Cecilia. The letter said that she was leaving Alfredo for a doctor named Arturo. They were moving to Honduras, and she was taking Rene with her. When Alfredo read over the letter a few times, he knew that something was wrong. First off, if Cecilia were to write a letter that personal, she wouldn't have typewritten in it. Also, Cecilia didn't take a change of clothes for herself or for Rene or his eyeglasses. Finally, the couple weren't having any problems, and Cecilia was excited about the baby. So Alfredo didn't think that she would just take off. Despite being aware of these problems, Alfredo didn't contact the police. Instead, one of Cecilia's relatives called the police and they began to investigate. The police immediately thought that Alfredo was acting strangely and sometimes indifferent. However, a reporter with the Los Angeles Times who interviewed Alfredo said that he was very distraught over his missing wife and stepson. Also, there was no physical evidence that suggested that he had anything to do with the disappearances, so the police began interviewing friends and family of the couple. Everyone said that it didn't appear that Alfredo and Cecilia were having marital problems. After the interviews, the police think that a third party may be involved because they learned that Cecilia had received 2 strange phone calls in the months before she disappeared. The first one happened 6 months before she went missing. It was a woman calling, and she said that she had a video recording of Alfredo kissing another woman at a baby shower and thought that Cecilia should see the video. Cecilia agreed, and the unidentified woman was supposed to call back to arrange a meeting, but she never did. Then, just weeks before she went missing, a woman called and said that she worked with Alfredo. She said that Alfredo's co-workers were planning a surprise baby shower for him, and the woman wanted Cecilia to meet up with her to pick out a piece of furniture. She told Cecilia to keep it a secret from Alfredo, and the police only found out about the call because Cecilia had told a friend about it. The day that they were supposed to meet was the day that Cecilia and Rene went missing. So the police interviewed Alfredo's co-workers. None of them made the call, and they weren't planning a baby shower for Alfredo. The police think that the call was a way to lure Cecilia away from her home so she would be easier to abduct. The police have speculated that the caller is somehow connected to Alfredo, but there is no evidence to back that up. Besides Alfredo, the next most obvious suspect was Rene's father, Rene Perez Sr. The police interviewed him, and he said that he had nothing to do with the disappearances, and he had an airtight alibi. According to an article in the Los Angeles Times, Rene Sr. ended up moving in with Alfredo. The article went on to say that both men were grief-stricken and felt hopeless, so they prayed together often. Sadly, their prayers have never been answered, and the whereabouts of Cecilia Newball and Rene Perez Jr. are still unknown. Thanks a lot for watching the video. Hopefully you found it interesting. If you did, please subscribe. We post a new video every Thursday and Sunday. You can also like us on Facebook and follow us on Twitter. The links are in the description below the video. But that's all for now. Thanks again for watching.